Hello, my name is Scott Perry. I'm a professional magician.
Hey, I'm Gaz Dakin, or Gareth Dakin. I'm a professional videographer, photographer, and basically content creator. And this is the Clan
Podcast.
Can. Brilliant.
So what are we talking about today, Gaz?
Today we are going to talk about a personal experience on starting a small business.
Something which I have done plenty of.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, what are your experiences of working with or running small businesses?
In terms of working with small businesses, I suppose I do a lot. Obviously, I've done a lot with you, and people around here, West Yorkshire, up in the north, a couple of small businesses from where I'm from down in Leicester. So it's more working within that environment than running the environment or starting the environment up, more than being the person that's heads on the block, so to speak.
I think you're being a little bit unfair on yourself in that you do have, is it gazdaking.com?
No, Gareth Dakin.
GarethDakin.com. You do have that, you do have a presence, but
true.
you do work independently on projects.
Yeah.
And you are hired out as Gareth Dakin.
That's true.
So I think that although you don't own and haven't launched a small business yourself, you do work very closely with small businesses. My point here of asking you about your experience with small businesses, even though you haven't officially set up a small business, is for the viewers basically to let them know that your comments, your questions are coming from a credible experience.
So that's a super good point. And actually, we can go into this a little bit. Actually, with the way that I see a small business is it probably a safety thing. In terms of, I've always worked in, I mean, years ago I used to work on site and I was a self-employed person then. I suppose, yeah, I mean, that's still experience, that's still self-employed experience. But in this industry that I work in now, I've always had that safety net of a monthly wage. So I suppose when I look at, people say, oh, I run a small business, I run my own business, it's really that safety net that they have to create for themselves. I suppose that's where I differentiate a small business and not a small business. But into your point, you're completely right. Yeah, I've got a brand, I've got a presence, I've got a website, and I do things for people within small businesses. I suppose I'm just in a really lucky position where I get paid a monthly wage at the minute.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to basically acknowledge that. Because that also kind of feeds into the almost stereotype of if you have another job, you're not really experienced or you cannot really say or give your opinion on self-employed people because you have a job, as well as that whether it's creative or another kind of side hustle, if you will, then I think that a lot of people maybe discount your opinion, but I think it's really valid because you do have so much experience with small businesses, with self-employed people, and I think that, I mean, this is the reason for this being the first episode of the Clan Can podcast, because we feel that we have some kind of experience or some kind of story or something to offer people from our experience. And that's why I wanted to ask you the question to begin with about what your experience with small businesses, because I wanted the viewers to understand that while you do have a job, you do also have a lot of experience with being self-employed and with self-employed people and small businesses.
Yeah,
basically.
That's a really good point. And I think you're right I'm touching on that point in that, yeah, I suppose, I don't know if there's like a stigma with it, but it definitely, I know that I feel sometimes like, almost like an imposter syndrome thing. You know, I don't own a small business because I get paid every month.
Imposter syndrome.
And that's it. I think, well, that's just the thing about imposter syndrome. It comes from all angles, doesn't it? It could be to do with your skill set. It could be to do with whether you're owning a small business or not. To walk in. I've walked into networking events and rooms before full of people with business owners and thought, can I say that I've done a bit of free work for people before and that's my brand? Or, But I suppose actually moving up here, it's a lot different. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely something there where you kind of, I know I do anyway, you kind of feel a bit of a fraud in that I, you know, have a small business, even though I know that I'm getting a monthly wage.
And quite often, I think that stigma that you talk about comes from comparisons with other people. Yeah. And quite often, especially these days where everyone can be an expert, and I don't mean that in the sense that there are a lot of people saying they're experts when they're not. I mean that in a way that there are a lot of genuinely very experienced people who are experts in the industry but aren't necessarily public figures or don't necessarily make six-figure salaries, and they do have very valid opinions. So I think it's really important to point that out, and that's what we're talking about today. Myself, I've been a self-employed magician for about 10 years now. I have a couple of other ideas for creating small businesses as well, completely unrelated to magic, but nothing that I've felt comfortable with launching an actual business for it yet, just dipping my toe in the water of other entrepreneurial ideas. But 10 years of running a small business, working nationwide, working a few times abroad, very high profile clients, royalty, some celebrities, a lot of quite wealthy people, wealthy clients holding private events. So that's my experience in terms of running a small business, and now you have Gaz's experience of that as well. So what do you think we should start on for the first point of, well, I mean, we've kind of covered the whole stigma of people who feel like they might not be genuine small business owners, but I don't want to stick on that topic too long, because I think it's important that if you're watching this and thinking or listening to this, wherever you're consuming this podcast, I think that it's important that you shouldn't maybe compare yourselves to anyone, not just the best of the best, but also anyone, because no one's doing what you're doing with your vision, with your ideas. No one's inside your head. So I think it's really important to get rid of that stigma from the very beginning and say that, yes, there are some people who are more experienced with running a small business, but I think that also it's not a good idea, whether you're early on in starting a business or pre-startup, or you're decades into running small businesses. I think it's a bad idea to make comparisons with other people, because you're not in the same race.
The boys over at the Creative Rebels podcast, they always say, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10, which is easy to do. We all do it. We will all compare ourselves at some point to that person on Instagram, or that person who's doing the great advert around shopping malls. Like, you're going to compare yourself, and I'm talking about my experience with photography and videography. It's quite easy to think, I'm never going to get to that level.
Yeah.
And although I've never really thought that about a small business or running a business, yeah, I think that very much falls into that category of, I'm never going to get to that level. How am I ever going to get to that level? And then ultimately you'll just stop. You'll never get there anyway, because you'll just convince yourself that you'll never be as good as them. But they might be 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, even 2 years down the line. You can't run yourself against, and like you just made a point of, you're you, and that's it. No one can be you, and you can't be anybody else.
Yeah.
So you just have to keep going. What I would like to touch on in your introduction there was that, you've performed for royalty, celebrity, Joe Blogg's wedding down the road. Did you then ever consider that you were more than a small business? If you're in front of royalty, did it ever cross your mind that you was a bigger business? Oh, actually, I'm in front of royalty now. I'm up here. I'm this echelon. Or have you always considered your small business a small business? And how do you define that as a small business? Is it turnover? Is it popularity? Is it performing for royalty? When would you describe yourself as a medium business?
I think that's a really interesting point, because especially in the world of entertainment, particularly with magicians, but not exclusive to magicians, a lot of people do have a exaggerated ego. So a lot of people do when and if and when they receive the opportunity to work with A-list celebrities, for example, they start to feel, like Billy Big Bollocks, right? They start to feel more important than they really are. And that comes down to a few different things. So my understanding and my interpretation of a small business would be that business is structured. And when you set up as a self-employed person, which is what I am, that is a small business. And you have myself as a one-person business is classified as a micro business. And then you have different levels of turnover. You have different levels of how many people you employ, which tells you in terms of the government and HMRC how big your business is and whether you can say you're an SME, which for those of you who don't know is a small to medium enterprise, which is covered in a certain bracket of employees, of turnover, of certain responsibilities. So my explanation of a small business would be, even if you're traveling the world, earning a lot of money, doing really great things, working on really interesting products with really interesting people, celebrities, royalty, whatever it is, there is nothing wrong with saying that you're a small business, because I still am. 10 years on from starting the business, I am still a small business. And as a magician, probably always will be, unless I grew into some celebrity magician who's creating TV shows, then it would change. But definitely still a small business for that reason. Business is just business is a capsule created by the government, by people, by educational systems to quantify certain results. Mm-hmm. So it fits you into certain categories. And I don't think that a person's experience should necessarily feed into what they feel like they are. Because if they feel that they're a big entity, but they're actually a small business, but they're telling people I run this international business, it kind of starts to become this fake it till you make it thing, which isn't always a healthy thing. So for me, I'm still a small business. I'm a one-person business, probably always will be, unless I started creating like mega TV shows that were broadcast nationally or internationally.
Does that mean then that, say you was, I don't like post-COVID-19 and stuff, you would end up, say for instance, you was in a position where you probably hire someone to look after your social media, mm-hmm. You might hire someone to look after your bookings or takings and stuff like that, maybe admin side of things, so you can concentrate on the art more. Would you still then classify yourself as a small business, say if you had 5 or 6 employees?
Of course, because they wouldn't be employees, which again comes down to the whole system. There's a very big difference between outsourcing to someone and having an employee and having a payroll system and all of that kind of thing. So
you'll never have that.
So I have an accountant.
Yeah.
I don't have a PA, but it's very normal and common for a lot of successful magicians to have a PA to just manage their day-to-day things that a PA generally takes care of. But they're not employees, and I think that's a really important differentiator. And for someone not to think that they're too big, and kind of present themselves as this thing that they're bigger than they are, because ultimately I'm just a guy who has a talent that X amount of people see value in, and they pay for me to come and make memories. Depending on which occasion it is, a wedding is more entertainment based. At private dinner parties, it's more about creating something special and a long-lasting, meaningful memory. So it varies on what I'm hired for, but I am still a small business unless I went down the route of becoming a limited company, hired staff. Okay. There's certain structures to how you can classify yourself, and I think classifying yourself wrongly and presenting yourself as something you're not can lead to a dangerous path.
Leading on from that then, we've got small businesses, they're classified mainly by HMRC, and the way that they segregate you into what's like sole trader, you know, and then
the
you go
categories.
through the fit to limited company and stuff. So that's really so. How can society then, especially nowadays, how are we going to benefit from having small businesses? What's the benefit of being a small business, and how will the rest of society, you know?
I think that the ways that small businesses benefit society is far and wide. Whatever it is, whether you're hiring someone who's skilled like me delivering a service, or like you said, your local butcher, when you shop like that with an independent business, what you're doing is directly giving back into your local economy, as opposed to feeding a larger entity which perhaps doesn't care, or your local interests or the interests of even your country are not really their prerogative.
Let's take, say, Amazon for an example.
I didn't want to mention any names, but right, it's one of the biggest marketplaces.
Look, I think you're completely right. And we all know that if you buy from your local shop, your local greengrocers, or you utilise the local magician that can sort your event out, you know that you're helping them massively.
Mm-hmm.
You're directly helping them. But then we're always going to go to Amazon because they do things on scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're completely right. I know when I buy things off Amazon, I'm like, can I go somewhere else? Oh, it's going to be here by tonight. So it's like...
But there's nothing bad about buying from Amazon. I just think that when we're talking about how running a small business or starting a small business benefits your local economy or community or your area that you provide services to, I think what we're talking about is that the cost might be slightly higher and it might be slightly less convenient for the customer, but what they're doing is feeding back directly into their local economy, which can only be a good thing. So that's kind of, in terms of how it benefits the immediate area around you, that's how it benefits. If people hire me in the area that I live in, I spend that money in the area that I live in.
That's
and
true,
that area, it's about being mindful as well. Like I say, there's nothing wrong with making a purchase from Amazon. Amazon is an amazing company. They really fulfill a lot of requirements that quite often other companies can't.
But on the flip side of that, we probably should. Yes, they're amazing at some things, but
what I'm saying is, we should make mindful purchases,
choices, yeah.
Rather than just saying, oh, it's cheaper on Amazon. Maybe think twice and think maybe that extra 99p at your local shop deserves it more, because what a sad world it will be if in 10 years, 50 years, everything's a global entity and every single independent seller has to go through a platform like Amazon. Yeah. And they don't exist individually anymore.
And I think that's it. That's the point. What a sad place the world will be without small businesses, without your local shops or your people setting up agencies and creative agencies and stuff in and around your city centre. It will be a super sad place if we all have to, go into this big capitalist machine. But I do think that it's very, especially up here in Leeds, where we've experienced it more. It moves away from the big corporates.
For sure.
I think that's beneficial for the city centre in itself.
Yeah, for instance, the Kirkgate Market in Leeds is amazing. Really, really well maintained, full of independent sellers of different kinds.
They did a great thing during, I don't know if they're still doing it, like every other Saturday or days, you order your food and you'd have takeaway food, like the local burgers did it, and just opened up, turned up, picked it up, left. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was great.
And how sad it would be to see that areas like that not exist in the future.
And do it.
Yeah, exactly. Or even a warehouse where kind of everything was almost like an Amazon warehouse dropship place, and you just picked up your parcel.
Yeah, like wholesalers.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it would remove a lot of human aspects and personality of day-to-day life and make it a lot more machine-like and a lot more conveyor belt-like. So that's in terms of helping your local community when both serving as a small business and purchasing from a small business. I think that's how it does it. That's when you choose to do that. That's what you're contributing to.
Yeah.
Before we have a quick break and talk about a point of interest, just some random point of interest, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of that point of how running a small business or purchasing from a small business benefits your local community, local area. It depends entirely, and this goes back to the whole business plan thing of starting a small business, things to consider. It goes back to, what do you want from the business? If you want to grow a small business from a local marketplace into a bigger entity like Amazon, then at some point you're going to have to trade morals for money. And this often isn't the case with small businesses. Often small businesses are driven by passion and morals and integrity. Whereas the larger the business gets, the more legal and the more structured and the more robotic the whole system becomes. And it becomes separated by departments as well that don't communicate with each other. They're all kind of working independently, not as a cohesive unit. So that is something that once you start looking into running a business, starting a business, and then also throughout years of working with businesses, I think that's something really interesting that you start to see. The fact that at some point in growing a business, there has to be a shift in morals, because if you have morals and you have feelings like a human being, it's difficult to fire people. It's difficult to let people down. It's difficult to make certain decisions. And ultimately, you have to separate yourself and say, look, this is business and this is my life. And there's a very big difference. And I think that quite often those two things with small businesses are intertwined. And that's why they survive, because the owners are so passionate about them.
Yeah, I think you're right up to a level. I mean, there are complete dicks of people running small businesses as well. Yeah.
Of course, you have the rogue traders and the people who will always probably be dishonest. But there's that percentage in everything, whether it's business or running clubs or charities. There's always a percentage that won't be completely honest. There's always a percentage that will try to do bad things or try to lie or try to cheat the system in some way. It always happens in everything. It's kind of a human aspect, unfortunately. We don't live in a utopia where people are just kind and generous and transparent all of the time.
And I think...
which kind of adds to it as well. Before you go on, I think that's what makes the game of business fun. That you have to find your place and differentiate yourself. And sometimes the way you differentiate yourself is purely based on the way you run your business, the morals, and how that makes your customers feel.
And I think it's worth to point out as well, you're allowed to make a mistake. You're allowed to cock it up. I mean, the best businesses, this term fail, is not really a thing, it was negative connotation, but
true.
Fail is fail. You've got to fail. You have to fail. You have to make the mistake. You have to fuck it up a bit. If you fuck it up time and time again, then fair enough, that's your fault. But you've got to be allowed to make a mistake to get to the point where you want to get to.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that comes from, like what you said, what do you want? What do you want? Because when you make that mistake and the shit hits the fan, do you want it enough? There's the grit there to get over that mistake and move forward.
Yeah, for sure.
And I suppose in that sense then, what's the one thing that Scott Perry would tell or what would you tell the Scott Perry that was starting 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that was a year or 2 years in, where the mistakes were made, whatever they were, what's the one main thing that you would say to that Scott Perry now?
Take it slow. So slow and steady wins the race, as the old saying goes. And I think that...
Cliche, but super true.
True in a lot of situations. And I know a lot of businesses now I say now we have the global pandemic and a lot of businesses are being hit by that, but I'm referring to just before all of this, where businesses were very profitable, people were doing well, and there wasn't, a global pandemic that was causing a big impact on businesses. But what I'm referring to is that I know a lot of businesses who are starting to scale backwards because they'd grown larger and more successful than they thought they would in the time frame that they'd been running the business, and it wasn't the best thing for the business. They lost their way, they lost their passion, they lost something by growing too fast, and also by that whole outdated mindset of you have to grow as fast as you can and become bigger and bigger and bigger and better. That bigger isn't always better. And I think that is the one piece of advice that I would give myself. Start small, go slow. So my business mentor always used to say, slowly, catch your monkey. And I don't know where he got that from. I don't know if that's a common thing, but he always used to say that, or it was something similar to that. Softly, catch your monkey. And just the point is, don't rush, because quite often you'll find yourself getting burnt out.
Yeah, and obviously I've felt that myself. I think in any walk of life, you can burn out. But I suppose it's the kind of, and it goes back to this comparison thing as well, in that you are trying to, like, I suppose in video, you see someone doing something and you want to be able to do that tomorrow. What you don't consider is that taken 6 years, 7 years to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's spot on, and something that I hear quite often as well.
Yeah, I think that before we move on to the random point of interest, and before we kind of wrap up and conclude this episode, this inaugural episode, I just want to mention one point, which basically is that there was a point. So I've been running the business since 2012, and about halfway through, I almost completely gave up. And it wasn't because the business wasn't successful. It wasn't because I was fed up of providing services. It wasn't for any reason of losing passion. It was because I saw another magician on television, and he was doing certain magic tricks that just blew my mind. And I thought, it goes back to something we said at the beginning of the podcast. It goes back to that thing of, I thought that I could never, ever provide a service even close, or do magic tricks that were even close to what he was doing. And what's the point of me existing when they could go to him?
No, it's good.
However, I found out that a lot of what he was performing was fake. It was video editing. It was fraudulent. And this is why I mentioned before about the danger of comparison. So I just wanted to mention that before we start moving on to the end portion of this episode, in that, I have felt those struggles, and I can speak from experience. And there have certainly been times where shit has hit the fan.
that happens on a regular basis in every business, whether it be corporate, small business. I think the only difference is in, I suppose it touches on your point that you made earlier, the passion and the drive that a small business has to put things right. If you was working for a corporate business, you're probably not that fussed. It's not your money, it's not your time. Well, it is your time, but you're getting paid for your time, and that's it.
It's also a lot more difficult to make changes like that in a multinational company. Yeah. So once you're looking at having 50, 100 plus employees, if you look to change something in the business, it takes an enormous amount of resource to do that. So do you continue running a business that isn't fulfilling the customer?
Well, that's a whole new episode in itself.
Yeah, it is. But these are all of the things that you have to consider when starting a business, because if you think about these things early on, they will really make the process much more enjoyable of running a business.
I think that's a great point to end that first half of the show on.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Enjoyment. This is the point of the show, which I think we're going to make a regular thing. Random point of interest to break up the middle of the show. Something that you've learned, something that you've read, something that you've discovered. For this week's episode, do you want to go?
At the minute, I'm reading a great book by Angela Duckworth called Grit, and it was pointed out to me by one of the guys on the Creative Rebels podcast, and I just find it super interesting in it's almost like the research behind what it takes to be gritty.
Gritty in what sense? Gritty as in perseverance of something.
Well, this is it. Like what does it mean to have grit? What does it mean to be gritty? Does it mean that you're going to just persevere? Probably not. Does it mean that you're going to be successful at the thing that you're going to be successful? Mm-hmm. Possibly not. To have grit is a whole combination of different things, and I've not finished the book completely yet. But one thing that really interested me was she makes a point that her daughter once gave up, couldn't get into a box of raisins, and she was mortified that she just gave up. Right. She thought, oh my God, what's going to happen now? My daughter's not got any grit. And yeah, I just found it really interesting the way that she included parenting.
So is this a self-help book, or is this kind of a mindset book?
No, I think it's more of a
coaching?
No, I don't really think it's any of those things. I think it's more
life education.
Yeah, I think it's more just academic study. This is what I found,
right?
And then with a little bit of sort of personal, integration and
some stories.
Exactly that. Yeah, so I think you can definitely use it as a self-help book. That's absolutely no doubt whatsoever. It's not got practical tips of how to be more gritty, mm-hmm. but it does show you the research that's gone into it and what they found. And yeah, I think it's a real good book to pick up.
Have you finished it yet?
Not quite. No, I've got about 50, 60 pages yet.
And how many pages approximately does the book have?
About 350.
Okay, so you're near the end.
I'm near the end.
So do you feel, having almost completed the book, do you feel more gritty?
No, but I feel like I know more.
You're more aware.
More aware, yeah.
Okay.
So if it came to the point where I'm like, is this one of those times where I need to be more gritty, mm-hmm. or do I need to stand up a bit more? And maybe, yeah, I'm definitely more aware. But yeah, I found that a super interesting book. So if anyone's interested,
yeah, we'll link it. Where can you get it? Is it a physical book? Is it an ebook? I think
you can get it on all. I don't think it's
generally sold everywhere.
So, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll stick it in the video description details in the podcast show notes. Cool. That is this week's point of interest. Grit by
Angela Duckworth.
There you go.
Perfect.
Great read if you want to be more gritty. Now, returning back to the subject of the podcast, which we'll now kind of wrap up and conclude and provide our final thoughts on starting a small business, kind of generally, broadly, advice we've given. I think we've covered a lot of things. Probably one final thing that I would quite like to contribute to it is to be careful of who you ask advice from. Because you in the very beginning of the business of launching an idea or even exploring an idea before you make it a business, you have to kind of gauge feedback. And even the big companies do this. The mega companies, when they're launching a new product, they'll push it out as a soft launch, and then they'll have the real launch. Everything works like this in the world. But the thing about running a small business and doing this is it's really bad to ask people for advice when these people who you're asking advice from don't have the knowledge of the industry. So something that I personally had an issue with starting a business in the entertainment industry was that none of my family, friends are in that industry. None of them have any idea how it works. None of them have any experience. None of them even know or have a friend who's in the industry. So while I valued their input and while I valued their opinions, it took me a long time to figure out that I shouldn't take them to heart and I shouldn't take them too seriously because their opinions are based on what they've seen on TV or kind of things that aren't reality of the entertainment industry.
And also they want the best for their son.
Exactly. So they have a partially biased opinion.
Yeah.
So I think that's on the final portion of this episode. That's the final thoughts that I have on running a small business without getting into kind of the deep inner workings of it. Is be careful who you listen to advice from. Some people will give you advice from a bad place. Some people will give it from a good place. But whichever place that advice comes from, it might not be relevant because of that person's experience. But equally, you have to gauge it because some people who have no idea will say something and you go, oh my God, that was such a great idea. That was such a great piece of experience. Even if it wasn't to do with your business or your idea, it will be something to do with them. But they'll say, oh, have you thought about this?
Well,
so just being careful and conscious of where you take advice from.
Absolutely. And I think what that boils down to as well is surrounding yourself with the
right.
Exactly that. Yeah. So surrounding yourself with the right type of people. They might not necessarily be magicians. They might not necessarily be content creators. They might be in tech or in mental health, or But if you surround yourself with the people that are going the same place that you're going. The idea of take the clan for example, the idea of just getting better, creating good content and good work with good people. But yeah, it's that surrounding yourself with those people that are going to get better and all drive toward the same goal. They don't have to be from the entertainment industry, or I'm never going to be able to give you advice on how you can create content for your shows. But at the same time, if you're needing to get something on Instagram on a regular basis, then you're going to come to the likes of me. Or if you need to create a bit more of an event and a bit more of a bigger show, you probably go to someone like Owen and Ash at least. So surrounding yourself with people that just know is a real benefit to you as a whole. And sometimes, what I've learned the most, feedback's obviously the most important thing ever. There's no point getting feedback from the people who are just going to tell you that it's great.
True.
Like your mum, like your dad, like your friends. Again, they don't really understand the industry, and that's okay. They're not there to understand. They just want what's best for us. They're going to tell us it's good, or they'll tell us it's bad, because they might not want us to venture into that area.
But this comes down to, like we were saying, with how you evaluate someone's opinion.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes, X is your opinion, and yes, it has X amount of validity, and everyone is entitled to an opinion of something. But whether you should listen to it, and whether you should take it in and work on that piece of advice is, like you say, find the right clan for you. For the direction that you're going towards. And
definitely someone who's going to test you, someone who's going to push you in a way that you don't want to be pushed. I was obnoxious enough to not really listen to feedback for so long, and it got me nowhere. And it's only because I had this almost like little fear of, I've just worked so hard on that, I've put my ideas into it, if they don't like it, what's going to happen then? And it's not about finding the people who don't like it, it's about finding people who go, actually, that there isn't quite right, but I want this, especially when it comes to video. So everyone's got an opinion on it, it's super subjective, but it's those people that you have to sift through the mud sort of thing and find the truffles. The gold piece of information is the person who goes, well, actually, we don't think that's quite right, but maybe this bit of the video was better. That looks good, but that looks weird.
I think a great sentence to round that off with would be to hear everything, but only listen to some things.
Yeah, of course, yeah. In terms of main points to take away from running a small business and being hopefully inspired enough to run a small business, what would be your 3 main takeaways? So someone who said, I'm going to run a small business, tell me how to do it.
I would say find a good resource as a foundation. This could be as a incubator hub. A lot of people are eligible for joining incubators now. It could be finding a business person you trust who you can ask to be your mentor, or it could be reading a book like How to Build a Brand in 30 Days. Find a resource like that, someone that you can lean on, someone that you can be your crutch until you learn how to walk.
Fair enough. Is that us then for the first one?
Yeah. Is there any takeaways that you want to give before we finish this episode off?
I think maybe I'd just bolt on to your point. I think it's kind of also like, yes, there's no way that you can just dive into these things. I think from my experience, I have gone about it a little bit differently in that the people that I lean on are the people that are already in the situation. So if I think to the likes of Buttercrumble or Owen, who's done it before, I've never looked into going to an incubator or that sort of thing, but only because I don't feel I need to.
You have your own incubator, you have your own clan around you who have experience of lots of different industries.
Just create your own group of people that you want to respect and learn from.
Completely. Source a clan. Basically, find that group of people, which can only happen over time.
I feel like every single episode is always going to boil down to source the clan, because that's the way.
Ultimately, or maybe that's the future merch. Source the clan.
Perfect.
The clan.
Okay, so that's episode 1 of our little tryouts. I imagine that we sound like absolute idiots waffling on, and the point is just to keep going and keep getting better. So episode 1 done.
Yeah, if you found this enjoyable, insightful, useful, in any way positive,
or fucking useless from the start,
well,
let us know.
I was going to say leave us some sort of rating to let other people know, because we're only going to find out if you actually engage with this. If we just keep talking into the universe and not hearing anything back, then we know this is probably not working. But I'm excited to see what people think of it, and all the details will be in the show notes, in a video description. And that's it, I think.
Perfect. Right.
Fist bump. That's how we're gonna.
COVID-19 fist bump.
Is that what we do? Is that the future sign out of video?
Across the kitchen table, fist bump over the kitchen table. Yeah, why not?
We'll work on it.